Welcome to the Holy Spirit's Curriculum of Joy podcast. I'm Wanaka Overhuber, and I'm your host. My guest today is Antoinette McInnes. Hello.
Hi, Monica, and everybody.
So happy to have you here, and I'm going to ask you some really important questions so that we can all grow together and walk each other home. So, how did you come to see the world the way you do today?
Wow, that's quite a question, Monica. So our journeys are very multifaceted and tapestries that get woven and very multi-layered. So it's not easy to find a single thread. So I think I need to start 5.5 years ago when I got a cancer diagnosis on the 3rd of March, 2017. I developed a very large lump on my throat, and I gave it no attention because I thought it was just a thyroid goiter. But I got pushed by friends to see a physician, and I got diagnosed with a very advanced, rapidly growing cancer, lymphatic cancer in my, it had started in my thyroid and spread to 22 glands in my throat. And the incredible thing was I had been living an anti-cancer lifestyle, or so-called, I thought, for a very long time. I ticked all the anti-cancer boxes. I was a vegetarian, mostly organic food, mostly meditator, yogi, exerciser, did gratitude journals. Yeah, I traveled all over the world doing spiritual workshops and courses. So the last thing I expected in my life was cancer. So it came as a huge shock, to be honest. I was absolutely astounded. If it had been anything else, maybe not, but not cancer. So, yeah, of course, I went on the whole cancer journey we do in the beginning, the shock, the fear, the denial, the anger, the why me, the operation, and then started a journey that actually transformed my life completely. It became the catalyst for where I am now. So that's why I've started there. And there's many threads to the change that came after that and why it came. The first was, I suppose, if I could just mention the threads and then maybe talk to them, because our journeys have many threads to them, just like a tapestry. One of the threads was it really forced me into a space of listening to guidance, to knowing if I truly had faith. I'd always spoken faith, spoken belief in God. I'd been on a spiritual path for 30 years. I'd been on a path to live my best life for 30 years. I really was ticking every single one of those boxes, but actually inside I wasn't a very happy person. I had a grinding anxiety and fear. And the cancer diagnosis became a blessing and a gift because it forced me, yes, the first thread was to look at, do I really have faith? Do I have this faith that I believe I have intellectually? So when you're facing death that closely, you really have to look that in the face. And astoundingly, I realized how scared I was of dying. So I knew that I didn't have true deep faith, because if I did have, I wouldn't be scared of dying. I also had to start listening to guidance, which became more and more and more of a journey for me until now, where I really, that's the guidance is what I follow now. But in the beginning, it was very difficult because the first guidance I got, I had not touched allopathic medicine for 23 years. From the age of 32 to 56, I had never touched an allopathic drug. I was very adamantly on an alternative natural healing path. I was very absolute about eating correctly and things like that. And surprisingly, my body asked me to do chemo, and I went to a kinesiologist to test this, and it just kept on coming over and over again that I needed to do chemo. I wanted to go to Mexico and do the Gerson. I wanted to fast. I wanted to do things that I'd always done in the past to heal myself. And my body, the kinesiologist said, was begging me not to do that stuff because it was too harsh, and that all I needed to heal was to find joy, and that I needed to do chemo. So that was if I look back on the last 5.5 years, that was the very first piece of guidance I got that was so counter-logical and seemingly even counterintuitive that I just couldn't get my head around it. It took me 3 weeks of thrashing around within myself to make the decision to go the chemo route. I was terrified of being rejected by my tribe because I hung around with people that didn't believe in that. I didn't believe in it. It was just so counter to everything I'd believed in for a very long time, but it just became stronger and stronger. And then I consulted 3 different oncologists, including one who was very alternative in his orientation. And he said to me, you can go the natural route and I'll still treat you, but you're going to be disabled before you die of cancer, because it was sitting at the top of my spine. So in the end, I went off and I had a huge op and I did chemo. And astoundingly, doing chemotherapy became one of the most profound healing journeys of my life. And that might sound completely insane to most people. And it would have to me too, except it brought to me things that I would never have gained in any other way, gifts actually. One of which was just to be so sick that I couldn't help anybody do anything. I had to ask for help. I really had to ask for help. I'd never done that. I'd been a person who'd looked after myself my whole life. I'd been very independent, looked after myself, and chemo brought me to my knees. It also showed me that in the allopathic world that there were some really good people, and I had a really good experience in the allopathic world, and I had a very curable cancer. And my body, most of all, was crying out for me not to do more punishment, although the chemo was a punishment, but it was a different kind of punishment. In a way, it was a restoration. It sounds so counterintuitive but it was a restorative thing for me because it stopped me from doing all the busyness I was doing in my life, all the people-pleasing, rescuing, running around, running a business. It just stopped me in my tracks, and it made me ask for help, and those were 2 huge things for me. So while I was on the chemo, I knew that my healing lay in my own hands. That had always been my belief system. But I had no idea where to start because I had already been living an anti-cancer lifestyle. So my journey was not to give up coffee and have more green juice because I'd already been doing all of that. So I'll never forget just not knowing where to start, but I just started kind of doing visualization processes on my body. And then 3 months into my journey, I remember sitting at the fire at my house and saying to God, what is my journey here? Why is this happening? And it's okay if I'm meant to die, but what is my journey through this? And I got a very, very clear message. And the message was, Antoinette, you need to throw out every single belief system you have, all of them, and start from scratch. Well, you couldn't have asked anything harder of a person like me, just like you couldn't have asked anything harder than ask me to experience joy. So now I was being told by a kinesiologist I needed to do chemo. My body said it wanted me to find joy to heal. And now I was told to throw out all my belief systems. And astoundingly, at the same time almost, somebody arrived at my house and gave me 2 books that she had been given. She also had cancer. And one of the books was Anita Majani's book, Dying to Be Me. And in that book, Anita Majani described, in hindsight now, my journey, actually. She had the same cancer as me. She was a vegetarian, very healthy person on a spiritual path before she got cancer. And she went off to India and did Ayurvedic. Sorry if you know the book, I'm repeating it, but we all get different things out of that book, I think. And she came back pretty much healed. But then people were telling her in the West, I think she was living in Thailand or wherever, and they said, but you're eating too much sugar and you shouldn't be doing dairy and that's going to be bad for your cancer. So she got confused, actually. And she ended up dying of that cancer, as you know, if you read the book, and coming back. And her message was that she'd got cancer because she had too much absolutism in her life, too much fear, too much people pleasing. And that really resonated with me. And at the same time, another book that was put in my hand was on psychoneuroimmunology, which is a recent medical science, for those who don't know, that looks at how stress and the way we operate in the world, our belief systems, our suppressed emotions, our thought patterns, our dysfunctional thought processes, all those things affect the biology of our body, in particular our immune system, our chemistry, our hormones. And when I read that book, I'd already got a glimpse from Anita's book, but when I read that book, I knew exactly why I had got sick. Well, not necessarily that it had caused my cancer, but the trigger had been that I had no idea until I read that book, actually, how many suppressed emotions I had, how many distorted belief systems I had, how skewed my worldview was, and most of all, my view of myself. That book had a shadow questionnaire in it, and I did the shadow questionnaire, and I was astounded at what came up. It was actually unbelievable in the beginning. I was like, this is not me, because of course the shadow is the unseen. It was such a blind spot for me, but I contemplated it for 3 weeks. And in the end, I was like, yes, on observation, that is happening. So I knew I could really trust this process that I was now on. And that book explained how my mental state and my emotional state and my unprocessed trauma in particular had led to me having autoimmune diseases before cancer. I had thyroid problems since the age of 30. I was 56 when I got diagnosed with cancer. I'd had fibromyalgia when I was about 40, I think. And in hindsight, all of that was because I was on the surface seemingly living a very spiritual, amazing life. I mean, I had a successful business. I traveled the world. I had read thousands of books on spirituality and self-help. I had lots of friends. I was popular. I did community work. I mean, on the surface, I had it all together. I had a beautiful home in a lovely place. But underneath all of that was a constant fear, actually, that I could never place, like a grinding fear, I suppose was the best word. Like, I just felt like there was something missing all the time, that I wasn't enough. Something wasn't enough. I could never put my finger on it, but I could be in the most beautiful place in the world on holiday and just feel this uneasiness, but extreme uneasiness. I had one unsuccessful romantic relationship after another. So I was successful in business. I had a lot of friends. I traveled. I did the whole spiritual path for 30 years before I got diagnosed. And then I landed up in this position. So, yeah, it's very multifaceted. So excuse me if I'm moving around. So going back to when I was told to throw my belief systems out, I was, well, now I'm a ship with no anchor. And that's terrifying. Because when you go up this is what I've learned now in the last 5 years in my healing journey. When you grow up with trauma like I had and suppressed stuff like I had, the coping mechanism, not coping tool, coping mechanism is to control everything, to be in control, to overachieve. I overeducated myself, over-rescued, over-helped. I was codependent, people-pleaser, passive-aggressive. And all of that was completely unseen in me. It was just the way I operated without having any idea that's what I was doing. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to throw out my belief system, but now what? Now what? It's like, I just felt rudderless. It was terrifying, actually, to be honest. It might sound ridiculous to other people, but it was really scary. So what came in then into my world was quite shocking. Not now, but at the time it was quite shocking, some of the things I had to change. But before I talk about that, I also want to say one thing. I talked about faith. So when I got diagnosed with cancer, and I was so terrified of dying, I knew that I had to go on a journey with my faith. And another thing that came to me, astoundingly, is that my subconscious wanted to die. And I most certainly didn't want to die on a conscious level. So in fact, the very first thing I did was to engage with my subconscious. Firstly, to decide if I did want to live. And then when I decided I did, to engage with my subconscious to say, okay, we're going to live now. So now we need to do whatever it takes to make this life good. So let's go back to me then now having to change my belief system. So many things came that weren't there before. And I suppose it's all about balance, really. I started eating animal products again. And that happened astoundingly because on chemo, one of the worst side effects is that you have very low white blood cell count. And it was really bad for me. I had every single side effect of chemo that a human being can have. My oncologist said he'd never seen someone with so many. I landed up in hospital 14 times. But one of the worst side effects was the white blood cell count. And a lady I'd met somewhere said to me, eat chicken livers and I promise it'll sort you out, because the injections you have to give yourself to sort it out are so horrific. They create such bad side effects. So I ate chicken livers reluctantly. It was a whole process, but I did. And it sorted out my white blood cell count. So it's just one example of many things that started busting these very absolute belief systems I had. So that was a major part of my journey. And then I knew that I had to cure my cancer or get through cancer, either to die well or to heal myself of cancer. I knew I needed to work with this internal stuff that this book had showed me was out of sync. I didn't know what it was at that time, but I knew I was fearful. I knew I was anxious. I knew I wasn't happy, even though I presented that way. And so, what I see in hindsight now is how astoundingly unobedient, that's not a good English word, but how I did not obey the Lord, how I did not obey messages I got deeply before this, how I didn't have faith when there were clearly miracles playing out as everyday order in my life. But I kind of just pushed them away for a number of reasons. A traumatic time with Christians and my Christian upbringing pushed me away from the church and into a whole lot of New Age stuff. And when Jesus kept on coming back, sorry, I'm going all over the place now, but Jesus kept on coming back into my life, and I just was like, wow, you've just helped me clear a ghost in my house. You were there when my father died, like lighting up the room, and my father died well because you were there. But still, I couldn't bring myself to this true deep faith. and I couldn't bring myself to call myself a Christian. So I still went on a very long journey with that. But the more I went on this journey with cancer and having to heal it, and then having to heal my mental, emotional, and trauma state, geez, God has been good to me, hey? And Jesus, it's like I just got to places over and over again where I actually just had no choice but to cry out and say, well, if you really are there, I need you now, and I need help, and I need guidance, because I don't know what to do. And it still happened right up to last year, and I'm sure it still will. But one of the things I started doing is looking at how I could heal this internal battle within me, which I didn't even know was a battle at the time. And astoundingly, I accidentally bumped into someone who became my counselor. And in 6 short sessions, she showed me parts of myself. Honestly, it just astounded me. There were such blind spots, how I had caused my own problems in relationships. Yeah, she showed me how I was passive-aggressive, codependent, people pleaser, but she did it in a very beautiful way. And she also took me to a place of understanding that it had come from what happened in my childhood, not to blame it or to get stuck there, but to understand how I was an adult who was actually 5 years old. She called it adult child syndrome. And I have interviewed her on my podcast because she had such a profound impact on helping me. So she told me I was an adult child, as 80% of people are actually. And so I set about then, healing that. And that, as anyone who's listening knows, and I'm sure you, Wanaka, you know from listening to your podcast, that requires many things. It requires great level of self-awareness. It requires showing up to look at all parts of ourselves and owning all parts of ourselves, especially those that have been disowned, denied, rejected, abandoned, because they don't feel right or good, or they're horrific, in my case, some of them. It requires going into deep subconscious work, shadow work, to reprogram the subconscious, because that's in place by the age of 7 years old. Yeah, I've now been studying, informally studying psychoneuroimmunology, neuroscience, neuropsychology, and the mystical spiritual path for 5.5 years, because that's ended up where my healing lay. So, I had to face the dragons. And were they dragons? And they still are sometimes, guarding the treasure. I had to ride the tiger, ride the wave, I call it. So I've spent the last 5 years, really in deep self-awareness as a starting point, which all of this takes time. It's a slow process. It's a great commitment. It's a repetitive daily practice. And it requires some very difficult moments, especially, one part of my story I always leave out, which is interesting, and I'm not going to leave it out anymore, is that I had or have, I don't know, borderline personality disorder. I self-diagnosed myself in 2014, and everybody told me I was crazy. I mustn't put that label on myself. I'm a perfectly amazing person. But I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't quite get it until I got cancer, and then I got officially diagnosed. And I've healed myself to a very large extent of that. When I say healed, I suppose it's one of those things you manage. It doesn't run my show anymore, that's for sure. It tries to. I have a very hectic mind state. All the symptoms of borderline personality, or most of them, I could tick the boxes. I don't know where I was on the continuum or where I am, because I don't really like to label me or anyone. However, I must say, gaining that understanding that I had that was very, very helpful for me in my healing. It's really, people say, don't label yourself, don't give yourself that label. And I'm like, no, but it's really helped me, because if I can take ownership of that and look it in the eye and then start observing it, and if it's true, then working on it and healing it, then I'm doing my job, I think, for myself and for God. And that's not easy. So borderline personality, interestingly, is a much harder thing to talk about than cancer, because mental disease is the elephant in the room, if you ask me. I've seen, if I say to people, I have cancer, or I had cancer, there's so much sympathy and empathy. And if I say borderline personality, 9 out of 10 times I can see people pull back, shut down, get fear in their eyes. So I think more and more that's something I'm going to show up to share, because I think that where I've been able to get to now, wherever that is. I mean, I contemplated that question because I knew you were going to ask it, where am I now? Well, I'm in a very different place I was 5.5 years ago. But am I experiencing bliss and zen and joy and love and light all the time? Gosh, no. But am I now able to access joy? Oh, yes. It just comes bubbling up. Can I experience unspeakable peace? Absolutely. Do I live a better life than I've ever lived? Yes. Absolutely, without a doubt. Everything in my life changed, by the way. I changed every single practical thing in my life as well. It took me 3 years, but I moved from where I lived. I gave up my business. I pretty much changed everything, and it took me a few years to get myself back together again. But I still, to this day, experience the things that come up. And I think they come up for most people. And for me, they come up very hard and harsh. And those are things like, because I'm now open, and I have been for all these years, but the more we go down this path, I've heard Wanaka talk about this as well. I think the more, you see, it's a multi-layered process. It has to be, so much of the spiritual and self-help I bought into, maybe none of you did, but I did, was this kind of instant soup, magical wand thing, and I really bought into that. So it's my stuff, that there was a quick fix, and that I needed to be zen and happy all the time. Otherwise, I didn't get it. I wasn't a spiritual being. I wasn't a God-centered being. And in hindsight, actually in the beginning, that made me really angry when I realized how I'd bought into that spiritual bypassing. I was so angry. I was angry with myself. I was angry with all the people putting it out there. And oh boy, was I judgmental and self-righteous. And it's taken me a while to get over that. But it's quite prolific, actually. And if I fell into it, I think many people do, because sure, I did everything in a human being's power to find the truth, to seek the truth, to be as spiritual as possible. I did everything. And it really took being broken open by cancer and going on this journey actually to heal or see and integrate and accept those parts of myself that were unacceptable. And that journey has not been easy, but that's the journey that's got me to now being able to experience unspeakable peace together with, sometimes not together, but sometimes it's unspeakable peace, and at other times it's, I don't know, what is it that comes up for me? A lot of, I'm still very self-critical, self-hating, self-judging. I can still be a bit self-righteous, maybe I still say I'm going to do something, and what I think and what I say and what I do are not always in alignment. I still have a dance with alcohol. I still am not completely showing up to be of service and to live my purpose, but I'm feeling my feelings. I am working with my triggers. I've done deep subconscious work. I have seen these parts of myself, and boy, some of them have been hectic, but they've come up. Sorry, I think I've said this before, but I then got deviated. They come up in layers, and at different depths from me and from other people I've spoken to and from the teachings I've now followed. Because if I had had to access all these parts of myself in the first 6 months, I would never have survived. Actually, I've had to look. Yeah, I'm very vulnerable and honest now, because I think a lot of human beings are walking around unknowingly with these blind spots, and also not knowing that it's okay, that we can be a completely God-centered person, to be of service, to be of value, and to love ourselves even when we're so imperfect. Well, that's where I'm at. So I had to look the first things that came up for me were my dissatisfaction shadow. I never even knew I had it. And then I worked through that. And then there was resentment, bitterness, and not just anger. There was fury, absolute fury. I think ultimately it all got down to very deep shame. It took me up until 2 years ago, actually, to access my shame. I could never access shame. It took me 2 years to access the resentment and the bitterness. It took me another year or so to access shame. And recently I've realized that my deep wound is actually self-hatred, not just low self-esteem. And the astounding thing is I'm a pretty confident, so-called successful, outgoing person, but it's that internal program, that internal story. So this might sound like this woman hasn't progressed at all. But the fact that I've been able to access all of that and ride the wave of it makes me courageous. So now I'm showing up to say some of my strengths, because I'm very good at throwing out my weaknesses. Definitely courageous, tenacious. I don't give up. And I have a very deep desire to be truly God-centered. And so the interesting thing is I'm all over the place now, but going back to guidance, I very reluctantly followed guidance in that first year I had cancer, but I had no choice. And once I started realizing all the guidance that came, although it felt wrong, really led to the most astounding outcome, whether it was chemo or finding joy or leaving where I lived to come and live where I live now. I moved to a place where I didn't know another human being. I didn't even know this place existed. I'd never been to it. And I was told to move here at the end of 2017, and I ignored it for 6 months until it got so strong. I eventually moved, and this is the place where my healing has lay. I got guided at the beginning of last year. I got COVID in December 2021. Not badly, but it had very hectic repercussions for me energetically and physically. And I got guided in February. I got told by Jesus, God, the Holy Spirit, I'm not sure whose voice it is, to do psilocybin. And I was like, no, this is one thing you're not going to get me to do. I said, I never. Be careful what you say you'll never do. That's the very thing you're going to do. I said, I'd never do chemo. I said, I'd never touch plant medicine. Well, it just didn't go away. And in the end, when it's a God-guided thing, it comes towards you, every single thread leads to it. So it was undeniably something I needed to do. So I did it, although my mind was going, you crazy, but I did it. And I did a 5-gram Heroes dose, and it was rough, very, very rough. But I came out the other side completely transformed from it, actually, because mental disease, so they say, I don't even know anything about plant medicine, really. I just got deeply guided to do it. I got guided to a particular facilitator who, if it had not been her, it wouldn't have worked out the way it was. She told me that mental illness has quite a dark energy and it was going to be hard for me, but I chose to do it anyway, and it was beyond hard, but I got through it, and it pulled the root on something so big in me. It lifted the veil. Yeah, and then I went and did something which got guided again, which was some brain training stuff, which works on rewiring, it works on the trauma, where the stuck trauma is in your brain. And I went and did that. And both of those things brought up a childhood experience for me that was so extreme that I was suffocating and having a heart attack at the same time. But the fascinating thing is that's where the healing lay, because psilocybin apparently, I don't know why I'm even talking about psilocybin now, I didn't intend to, but I only read recently, because now I've started researching it. After doing it, I start researching it, is that it takes away the fear, that fear in your brain that's scared to go back to trauma. Anyway, I'm not suggesting people do it. It has to be guided, deeply guided, and properly facilitated. But I'm giving it as an example how deep guidance led me to deep healing. And there weren't things I would have chosen to do, and there were things I didn't want to do. And I think maybe one more thing I want to say is I kept not pushing Jesus away, and I never thought I'd speak about Jesus publicly, and I don't even know why. So, Wanako, it's no coincidence that we're sitting here doing this now, and it happened. You invited me 2 days after I decided I needed to start speaking whatever it is that the Lord wanted me to speak, not what I thought I should. Because I'm surrounded by people who get uncomfortable when I use a certain language. So there's still a part of me that doesn't like to be rejected, you know. But anyway, Jesus, I told you, he helped me clear a ghost in my house years ago. He did many amazing things in my life, but still I just was spiritual, but more in a different way. So Jesus has the most amazing sense of humor, and he doesn't give up. That's all I can say. He came to me 3 times since October 2021 in a coffee shop because I refuse to go to church. I go to church now, but I stopped going to church. I refuse to go to a Christian church. And I was very traumatized by Christians, so I didn't really want much to do with them. So Jesus said, okay, we'll get her in a coffee shop because she loves coffee shops. I'm a coffee shop fanatic, and I love coffee shops. And the weird thing is I've always thought over the years I shouldn't be drinking coffee because it's so bad for me, and eating toasted sandwiches, which I don't often, but when I go to coffee shops, that's what I do. And I'm laughing because I think Jesus actually has a sense of humor. And he's like, why would Jesus come to me in a coffee shop 3 times when I'm having coffee and toasted sandwiches if I wasn't ever meant to have coffee or toasted sandwiches? I don't know. This is just coming out. But so the first time was in October 2021, and I met 2 old women in a coffee shop I'd never seen in my life before. And it's a very long story, but I just started talking to them. And I wasn't even going to go to that coffee shop because I don't like their coffee, but I kept on getting this message, you're going there, you're going there. So I went there. And in the end, I gave my life to Jesus in a coffee shop, sitting in front of 2 strangers. And I was like, I left there. I was like, what was that now? And then I have to say, after that, my life got really better and really worse. And that's maybe not a conversation to have on this platform. But yeah, I think my experience has been when we really show up to show up. The devil, the dark side, the part of us, because it's outside, but it's supposed to be inside, the part of us that resists that hits hard. Actually, I don't know if that's your Wanaka is nodding. So Wanaka, one of the episodes you put out, I've only listened to about 4, but one that had a profound impact on my life. So thank you was, I think her name was Joy, actually. And she spoke about how Jesus kept on speaking to her and she wouldn't obey. And then she started obeying and everything worked out. But she talked about how the subconscious fights against us experiencing joy, actually, and being peaceful and being deeply God-centered. It it resists that. And she said she told her subconscious to please show up for miracles and for joy. And that profoundly changed my life, that one sentence. So I have subsequently actually started, because I have a very analytical mind, even though I'm very faithful now, I started getting into lots of Richard Rohr's work. And Richard Rohr, for those who don't know him, is a Catholic priest, but one of the greatest mystical spiritual teachers on the planet. If you ask me, his work's just astounding. And he talks about how the ego resists change, how our minds my mind can terrorize me out of joy and faith. And I think it's just, there's nothing wrong with our ego and we need it, but we have to be aware, from what I've studied and what I've experienced. And as she said that day, is that the subconscious program, and that's the ego, the mind, which is there to keep us safe and loved, but does it in all the wrong ways if you've had the trauma I had as a childhood. And therefore, it does it in all the weirdest ways. It's like you're trying to be controlling, which is the opposite of having faith. You're in anxiety and fear because that's like a way you keep yourself safe, but you can't be safe if you're not in faith. I mean, it's just, so yeah, there's still that, so from the time I gave my life to Jesus in October 2021, I got hit very hard. It's interesting, I was saying I got hit hard, but I've now realized, it was my insides. It's the inside, is the outside's paramount. I think there are dark energies out there, but I think what's inside of us is paramount. So this battle has been going on. That's why I called my podcast Free Yourself from the Battlefield of the Mind, because I watch my mind now, even like today, and I'm like, wow. So, you go through various stages and phases. Oh, and then Jesus came to me twice more in coffee shops, and I went to do a Christian pilgrimage called Emmaus, the Walk to Emmaus, which started in Spain. I don't know if any of you know it, but it was just astounding, just complete unconditional love in the name of Christ. And I just wept the whole way through this weekend. Yeah, I mean, it's just coffee shops. Yeah. And then last year, I got so sick post-COVID, and I didn't have the money to have the tests. They were very expensive. I think I had microclotting. So I had terrible problems with my heart and my lungs. I think it was microclotting. And I got to a point where I had nothing and nowhere to turn except to pray. So I started praying. And I said to the Lord, here I am again in trouble praying. And if I'm going to die now, help me to die well with grace. But if I'm meant to live, show me where my healing lies, because I don't know what to do now. I was on my own. I live on my own in a very remote place, an hour away from a hospital or a doctor or anything. And this was in the middle of the night. And the most astounding thing happened that night. I started crying, and then I accessed in me my dissociation. I never knew I was a dissociated person till then. That was only last year, because it was my lungs and my heart. And I think it was microclotting, but what the Holy Spirit brought to me was to see a part of myself that I hadn't seen, that how disconnected, but more than disconnected, dissociated I'd been from myself, my body. And even though I'm a healthy eater, I've always exercised from nature, although I'm out in nature every day, from people, even though I've always got a lot of people in my life, from God. And I just wept when I realized how much I'd missed out on my life because I'd lived behind this dissociation wall. But I also knew it was just a coping mechanism that I developed because of my childhood traumas. And then I got better. I got physically better. And what came to me since then is that the body truth goes ahead of the mind lie. And I've started doing research, in some most incredible writers of the spiritual and psychological causes and emotional causes of disease. And interestingly, they all happen to be Christian writers. The one is Dr. Stradom, Dr. Caroline Leaf, and Dr. Wright. And interestingly, two of them are South African. But I dug deep into these books because I had these terrible physical symptoms, and then I started having anaphylactic reactions. I started getting these skin rashes recently, and then choking. And anyway, just one example. So this is where I've got to now, is that skin rashes are about fear, and they're in particular about fear of intimacy, intimate relationships. And that was certainly something I was dealing with. So yeah, I've dived into so many different things on this journey, and I'm far into it, but I think it's a lifetime journey. It's not easy, but it's worth it. It's sometimes riding those waves of feeling my feelings or accessing my shame or just stopping to fully experience what I'm experiencing feels like I'm going to die, but I don't ever. I end up cresting. For me, it always feels like, because I live at the seaside, like surfing a very big, dangerous wave, and then it sort of gently lands on the shore if you just go with it and not fight it. Yeah, I've realized that I can see all parts of myself and still be completely acceptable in the eyes of God and of myself. And now for me, in about the last year, the subconscious stuff just comes up. I was going to a hypnotist. There's subconscious stuff that's such blind spots for us. I think it's very hard for it to be accessed, no matter how good the psychologist is, the counselor, or our own practice. And I think we have to go deeper. Maybe that's why I got called to do psilocybin. I think hypnotism worked well for me. But in the last year, I haven't had to do anything. It just comes up. It's like, but I have made sure that when I start feeling a feeling, whether it's guilt, anxiety, shame, because now I know what shame feels like, I stop and I say, okay. And then I feel it fully. And then I make inquiry. And I don't always get an answer. So I go, okay, do I need to know anything about this? Do I need to know its trigger from the past? Is there anything I need to do? And sometimes nothing comes, and it comes 3 days later when I'm in the bath. But yeah, so Monica, I don't know, that's a lot. But I'm good, and I think that's because I'm okay with not being okay, actually. And I am now able to fear, because fear is the deepest factor, because of course if you're self-hating, it's very hard to believe, to have faith in anything, actually, and trust. And so now my fear comes, but I can deal with it. I can feel it coming before it comes. I know that it's not real, actually, that I have a choice. That false evidence appearing real is something that's out there so often, but it's one of those things, like all of the things that are truisms, but as intellectual knowledge, they're nothing until we experientially get them. But I know now that when fear comes, that I can access that part of myself. It's funny, I never knew that the Course in Miracles was about reuniting with who you really are and walking each other home, because that's something I say all the time. I heard you saying it on one of your podcasts. But I can access that part of myself, and I can say that the faith I can access is the opposite to the fear. So the fear, it is an illusion. It is real. I have to feel it and feel it being real. But yeah, I pray often when the fear comes now. I've stopped an anaphylactic reaction 2 weeks ago, and I was even starting to choke by fully feeling that fear, because the panic is half of the problem. And then praying and just saying, no, that part of me that is the spark of God does not need to have this fear. So yeah, I don't know. Have I overtalked? I'm sure I have.
No, there's no over talking. We love going deep and learning a lot from each other. So I'm very thankful that you were willing to share this. And I know there's a lot more to the story, and I'm really proud to hear that there's people like you who are willing to talk about these things, because there's so much meaning in it, to gain from being from being willing to talk about it. We misjudge each other. We have guilt. We have this. We have that. We judge ourselves. We are so uptight about it. We have so many things bottled up there, right? And we're trying to hide from them, and we're blocking the joy. And so the amazement is when we learn like you are learning, right? And everyone is learning in their way, whichever way that is. And when the decision comes, I want to live, right? Like you made that decision. Okay, I want to live. Okay, then there's the next thing is, how do I want to live, right? And what do I want to live, and what do I want to base it on? And you said, yeah, okay, I want to be guided. I want to live who I am, right? I want to live this purposeful life and this joyful life. And so, yes, then all the things came up, like you said, okay, it got worse. It appeared to be worse because all these things came up that we're saying, yeah, you can never live that life that you're thinking of, right? That's a pure fantasy. That's not it, non-existent. That's not real, right? And in A Course in Miracles, it says, the way we see the world is wrong side up, right? And so we have to flip it and see it right side up. And the previous speaker, the last podcast, he was speaking about that as well. Everything turns around, right? And suddenly everything's right side up. So what does that mean, in a life where you've been looking at it in one way? And, we know our eyes and our brain, they say the image is the wrong way around, and then the brain has to turn it around. Well, it looks like our whole thinking is the wrong way around. It needs to be turned around to be able to see things as they are. So even the way our eyes are physically made are a symbol for that. So anyways, so yeah, I think it's important to be willing to follow guidance, even to get to know things that you thought were the opposite of what is good, perhaps, but not always, right? But in your case, there were some things where you had a major resistance to doing them and turned out to be a blessing. So maybe we want to go into that. How do we recognize when maybe the opposite of what we think is true is actually the blessing? And we might be able to gain that blessing by listening to it. So if you don't want to say anything about that, maybe someone else wants to. Is anyone here who would like to
Oh,
comment?
sorry, I didn't realize you were asking me. Yes. Yeah, Monica, that's a big one. It's a big one. And people will say, I heard someone ask you a question on a podcast. How do we know when it's guidance? So for me now, I quite often know if it's counter-logical. Actually, it's usually guidance because, no, I don't know. It comes in a way. It's a definiteness, For me, it's been so definite. At the moment, I've got guidance that I'm not sure about. I'm being told to move again, and I'm like, are you sure about this? It's not 100% clear yet. But when I was told to do chemo, when I was told to move here I lived very far away from here, when I was told to go to a coffee shop I never wanted to go to, it was so definite. It was like, I don't hear voices or anything, but it was like, no, you are going to go to that coffee shop. And that when it's counter-logical, like I didn't like the coffee there. I didn't want to do psilocybin. Why would I want to move to a strange place where I didn't know anybody? But when it's very definite, Yeah, I've learned since I did chemo, if it's counterlogical, sometimes it's that's the very basis on which I know it's guidance. But I also wait until it's very certain. And like now, because I'm not certain about moving again, I'm like, okay, I wait for flow. Then it has to flow. It has to come towards me, because that's what happened with all those other things. It comes towards until it's undeniably your path. So, but for human beings to let go of their conditioning, and I don't say this judgmentally, because boy, for me to let go of it was, and still I see my conditioning having such a hold on me. We are so conditioned to believe this is right and this is wrong. And so we're so anti-paradox and stepping out of our comfort zones. And the extraordinary thing is, the world I got into for 30 years was because it seemed right. It was vegetarian, organic, spiritual, self-help. It was good. And that's not necessarily true. That's been one of the biggest awakenings for me, is yes, it's better to eat more vegetables than other things, but that in itself does not create health or awakening. It's far deeper than that. So yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, it does, and it's important to talk about this. So the thing is, we get so stuck on the methodology that we forget the purpose, right? So yes, we think this is the method, and then we think we have to do it that way, and then we get so, yeah, it's actually like, you could say it, you get blocked. You're blocking yourself because of this set way things have to happen. So yes, I have that same issue as everyone else probably does, or I doesn't. It doesn't matter. If you don't have that issue, then you probably are not going to listen to this podcast to the end. But anyways, the issue of actually saying, okay, I'm gonna. It's not even the issue of going beyond the comfort zone. The way I understand Yeshua is, we need to come from where we are at now, and that is the most helpful. We have this myth that to be helpful means you have to be ahead of everyone, right? You might even be the person who's least capable of something, and you're still the most helpful because you're willing to talk about it or share it and give it to everyone, right? And it might even be the exact thing that gets someone who's seemingly is way ahead, or is actually way ahead. It doesn't matter, right? If they're way ahead, to actually be able to reach heights they never would have reached without that person sharing. So we really need to trust that. And that's what Yeshua has told me. Trust that. Come from where you are at, no matter where that is. That's the most helpful.
Wow, that's so helpful for me. Thank you. And I think, I don't know what message you're getting, but for me, my experience has been that it's through discomfort is the price we pay for good life, actually. And so many humans are avoiding the darkness or the hardship or the shadow or the discomfort. But that's the very place where the gifts have come, the big gifts for me.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Okay, is it the discomfort that brought the gifts, or is it the willingness to trust that there is another way? Like A Course in Miracles speaks of, there must be another way.
Okay, yeah, so my language wasn't great. So it's not the discomfort itself that brings the gift, but it's often hitting your head against a wall, or hitting some great discomfort that breaks people open like me to start looking at another way. So I don't know, to look for because there can be a gift in it. So would I have got to this place where I am now if I hadn't got cancer? I don't know, but that was my catalyst. So cancer is not a comfortable thing. It's not a great thing to have. It's awful. And people get very, very angry with me, actually, when I say cancer was really a gift for me. Some people get so angry with me. They go, how can you do that? How can you even say something like that? It's such a terrible thing. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry. It wasn't good at the time, but it really changed my life for the better. But I suppose it depends what we do with the discomfort. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it also speaks of this issue in A Course in Miracles. There's a point in your life or a point of discomfort or unhappiness at which you decide there must be another way. And then you start allowing that in. So yes, you reach that point and then you start turning around, right? So turning things upside the right way up again. But it's different for everyone, and it looks different for everyone. And it's not the fact that it's not the discomfort in itself, but the fact that you decide, okay, this is enough. I want something else. There must be another way, and then allowing that help to come in, to that to be there. And that can be very traumatic in a sense, because the trauma was there, right? Because of your not listening to the guidance that you have within you all those years. But it's not about feeling guilty about it, because that's the cause of it. So it's actually about allowing yourself to see it differently. And I think that's what's so beautiful in A Course in Miracles, when it speaks of the Holy Spirit showing us another way of seeing things, a way in which we are recognizing that we are love, that we are one, that we are whole. And there's nothing that can change that, no matter what we may think or make up to say something else.
Yeah, I think to take accountability for me now, but without judging myself or blaming myself, is that's been a very big turning point in my life. Yeah.
So let's see. Let's open up the floor a little. Anyone have a comment or a question or something you want to share? Because otherwise I have plenty to say about these things and speak about with Antoinette, but I like to have more siblings involved. So anyone want to say something or share something? Okay, I will continue with the topic. One of the topics you brought up was healing, because we just talked about Yeshua and his ways of, and I think that's a very beautiful thing, that you were willing to talk about Yeshua without having this defensiveness that you have to prove anything, or that you have to belong to a certain community in order to be allowed to speak about it, or that you will lose anyone because of it. We don't know. You know, I've there's so many. It was so fun when I have guests who are like, yeah, but we use a different language. We this, that, right? Then I say, yeah, well, I'm open-minded. You can use whatever you want, language you want, as long as it's a message of love, right? So I, I'm not, and they're like, yeah, but you'll lose people. I mean, your people are expecting something else. And I'm like, um, they're, I simply see it as whoever is willing to share a message of love is very welcome. And everyone can decide which podcast episode to listen to or not. I always add a short description so people can choose.
Yeah, Richard Rohr says, Jesus is an inclusive God, not an exclusive God. I don't know. It's a topic here. I'm discussing it with you on a podcast, but it's a topic that's very sensitive. I don't know, with a lot of people in my world. So I suppose when I went to the Emmaus pilgrimage, I don't know if any of you know of it, but it was astounding. If you can do it in your country, do it. It's so extraordinarily beautiful. And in Emmaus, they said to me, but why do you have to label yourself anything? You're a child of God. And Jesus is palpably in my life, and I absolutely cannot deny that anymore, and I won't. But it's so interesting how human beings, semantics it's all part of our conditioning and all that. And I understand that because I was a person that was very hung up on semantics in the past. So thank you for being so inclusive and embracing it all.
Yeah, and it's one of the beautiful traits of a teacher of God, according to A Course in Miracles, open-mindedness. So not just, it starts with trust, but open-mindedness is one of those traits. And I think that's very important for us. I know how closed-minded I am, still am, and have been in the past in other ways that were recognizable to me. I probably haven't recognized, I don't know how many parts of my thinking that are closed-minded. And it also says, teach what you want to learn. So I guess one of the things I want to learn is open-mindedness.
And what you teach, you're going to be tested on. I don't know if you're having that experience.
So yeah, back to the healing. So healing is a very important topic because the definition of what it means to be healthy has been moved around in many ways over time, and every tradition has a different idea what it means to be healthy, right? And so I heard you were speaking about joy and happiness and peace of mind and things that A Course in Miracles also speaks of, right? And I think that's what you were saying. You wanted to be happy, right? And what A Course in Miracles loves to say is there's one thing we can all agree on. We want to be perfectly happy. What do you say to that?
Well, my body told me it wanted joy to heal. I went for muscle testing to a kinesiologist, sorry, who I really trusted. And my body said, all it needs to heal is joy. And I was like, no, this is not. I can go to Gerson in Mexico. I can fast. I can do all kinds of things. But anyway, the astounding thing was, Monica, this is how God has led my life. And now only in hindsight, I really see the miracle, the everyday grace, the miracle of it. I went to a coffee shop straight after that. And I sat opposite a stranger at another table, and he started speaking to me, and he told me the story. This is real. This is true. He said that he was on a bus in Mexico, and some guy got on the bus next to him and started telling him the story about how he had been diagnosed with cancer somewhere in Europe, and it was terminal, and he decided to come back to his birthplace to die, which was Mexico. And he was going to just die at the beach there. And he met someone on the beach, and this woman said, I can heal you of your cancer. All you have to do is laugh. You have to learn to laugh. And he said, well, I've got nothing to lose. So he did it, whatever she wanted to do. And he got healed. And so I get told this. I drive up to a coffee shop. I get told I need to find joy to heal. I drive up to a coffee shop. And I hear the story from a perfect stranger. So I'm like, wow, God knows how doubting I am, And then because I had this cancer sitting at the top of my brain, I had at the top of my spine and close to my brain, I actually had to do chemo. I had no choice because I would have been disabled. And the stunning thing is that the chemo in some really bizarre way helped me find myself and find joy. I mean, one of the things I did, for example, because I was so sick, is that I just lay around and watched movies all the time. And I had never watched a movie unless it was serious, like it was a spiritual thing or a self-help thing. And a friend of mine brought me all these movies and she said, oh, for goodness sake, you're really sick. Just watch movies. And she also told me to sleep. I was so upset because I couldn't get up early in the morning and go running and do, I'm a very busybody. And she said, no, you're going to sleep. And I started sleeping till 12 o'clock, watching movies, having to ask for help. And it was like, wow, who would have thought? Because if I'd done fasting or some natural process, I wouldn't have stopped, you see, because I would have carried on carrying on. Because the chemo actually made me sick. I wasn't that sick from the cancer, but the chemo made me sick. Would I do chemo again? I don't know, probably not. But it was what I was meant to do, and I had to find joy. So it's interesting, the Course in Miracles says that. So now, could you have asked a harder thing from me, Antoinette McInnes, than to find joy? No. In 2017, it was like, are you freaking serious? I had never, the kinesiologist said to me, tell me one time in your life you've accessed joy. I could not remember one single moment in my life I'd been joyful, not one, and I was 56. The astounding thing is that about 2 weeks after my diagnosis, I remember standing in my garden and this joy just came bubbling up in me. And I was like, this is not possible. I've got stage 4 aggressive cancer that's galloping. I'm on chemo. This can't be joy, but it was joy. And Gary Ramsey, who I've interviewed a lot on my podcast, and maybe you will, he talks about how I think what happens is when we access that, when we're in such a crisis like that, if you're faced with such a shock like he was with his first terminal diagnosis, it just catapulted him into that state of being one with who he really was, like instantly. It was just like, and it's almost like that cancer diagnosis did that to me. It just stripped all the layers, of the, but unfortunately they came back and I've had to spend the last, not unfortunately, or I have spent the last 5.5 years doing the real work, because it is work to act. And now only, I don't know how many months ago, it's only months I can truly access joy. Unspeakable peace, I'd say, came about 3.5 years into the journey. Joy only, I don't know, I lose track of time, maybe the last 6 months, like really joy. And it's undirected joy. It's not like, it's not like I win R1 million or something. It's just like, oh my word, I'm so joyful. Is this joy? Oh my word, I'm feeling joy. It's like, it's such a gift, but I've done the work, and I don't mean that disparagingly against me or anyone, but actually we have to do the work. I've done the hard yards, and I'm not always in that space. This morning, I woke up feeling very discombobulated and weird and anxious and worried, and but I know what to do with that now. And sometimes I just let it be, and mostly I can transmute it. I don't know if that's a word the Course in Miracles uses, because once you've accessed that part of yourself who you really are, you never forget that. The other stuff, the subconscious stuff really tries hard. My ego still tries really hard. But once you've accessed that, you never forget that. It's always...
Yeah, that's a very important point. Once you know what joy is, doesn't mean that you will follow it, but you cannot forget it. And the next thing is that the normal way of thinking says it's a fantasy. It's imagination. You made that all up, So they doesn't even want you to believe it's a real experience, right? But it's real to you, and you can't forget that it's so real to you. It's so to speak, it's beyond what you think is what you would have ever dreamed of being real, right? So you think it can't be real, right? That's the reaction. And so that's the journey. What you're saying, it's a lot of work. Okay, it's whether it's work or not can be debated, but the experience of joy doesn't let go. So either in one way or another, you will move through all that guck and all that stuff that's keeping you from being happy. And whether you are an active part of it or a passive part, you don't know at the time, and you will figure that out. You might not ever know, right? Some people, one of the issues that we have is we think we can do something. We can do something to fix our lives, and we can't. It's not something you can fix. It's coming. The answer comes from within, and that's why it's such a big deal to decide to listen to that answer. I mean, and that's the big thing. And that's what I think is a huge thing, is to say, I can listen to it. I can come from where I'm at. I'm helpful. And even when I'm totally unhappy and distraught, and I'm showing all the signs of being mean and awful and whatever else, right? That's where I'm at that moment. And if I'm willing to be there, I'm actually helpful, because I may be willing to accept help. I may not be, whatever it is, right? But you are not hiding, even though you think you're hiding, right? Even when you think you're hiding or trying to hide, you can still be the most helpful to people and to yourself. And that's what's so amazing. Like you were saying, even in the worst pain, you might be the helpful. That might be helping you, right? And others. The thing is, what helps you is helping others as well. And of course, in Miracles, it says you can never heal alone. It's not possible. So when healing or miracles happen for you, it's not just happening for you, no matter what you think. So that's what's so marvelous about it.
Yeah, Monica, one thing I've loved about listening to you speaking on podcasts and some of your guests is the sharing of the authentic, real stuff that, I just thank you so much for confirming this for me, because sometimes it feels like a very lonely path for me. It's okay. Even when you're not okay, you're right. It's that deep, even when I know I'm out of line, like I've drunk too many glasses of wine, or I'm being a real bitch, or I'm like having a hissy fit again, or I'm like, there's still that part of me. It's astounding, especially this year. I'm like, the thing that's changed me drastically, it's one of the biggest things, is to have self-compassion and that deep knowing that God-centeredness is there and that joy is there no matter what. It's just, so the suffering is not nearly as much as it used to be in the mind, because it's that thrashing around. It's mostly at night. I don't know for other people, but for me, it's just like, you're just not good enough. Why didn't you do that better? And then I can just feel, I think that's what you're saying. I can just feel this part of me that's going, it's all okay. It's like, a child of God. But I only got to that. So I don't know anyone else's journey. I can only share my own. I only got to that by unlayering those parts of myself that were covering that spark of God. I had to reunite, relearn who I really was, because I thought I was connected, but I wasn't. I was disconnected from everything. So I had to do the work, in inverted commas, daily practice, commitment, trigger work, shadow work, subconscious stuff. Yeah, and more the joy comes and the peace and the equanimity as well. You know, that's the thing people speak about a lot in the spiritual world. And I always, detachment, equanimity, and I really didn't get it till now. And it's like, everything's just okay, even when it's not okay. It's not about everything being perfect all the time, you know, or love and light and zen and joy. It's like just all okay. But sometimes, I mean, I do still freak out, and it sounds like you do too. And I love that you share that authentically, because I think we're all human beings and most people are experiencing this stuff, I'm sure. It's just very unspoken. So thank you for bringing people on your podcast to talk it, and that you do.
Yeah, one of my favorite ways of freaking out is holding grudges and blaming others, and blaming myself as well. And this is, and then the next thing is, where is the help coming from, right? Who's going to help me? What's going to help me? And I don't know. I don't always know. I may have my go-tos like, yeah, Yeshua, please help, and this and that, right? But it doesn't always feel like one is being helped, right? So the grudge is too strong. The grudge is to this, to that, right? Then you have to go to your siblings and say, please help me. I'm totally in this. I'm totally mad. I'm freaking mad. I'm angry. I'm totally desperate. I'm questioning everything in my life. And these are things and that's what you were just saying, you know, it's helpful to you that I speak about it and others are speaking about it. And so your speaking about it is also helpful. And that's what we need, what Yeshua is saying. Come from where you are at. I mean, I know these grudges are absolutely blinding and painful that we have, right? And I'm not fully over grudges that I have right now, right? And I need to recognize that this grudge is holding me back in so many ways. But it's a grudge to in so many ways. You know, like I said, Yeshua is saying, even if you're the worst at something, you might be the one to inspire everyone because you're willing to speak about it where you are at, from where you are at. You don't have to be number one according to the world to be number one in sharing and helpfulness.
That's very helpful. It's really helped me, that. Thank you. I think my main thing is I'm so funny. I was out walking one day in nature here and I got this message. There's an angel of self-righteousness on your roof. And I was like, oh yeah, I got an angel on my roof. And I came home and I looked up angel of self-righteousness and I was like, no, this is not a good thing. So I think maybe most people go through that stage of self-righteousness and a bit of like arrogance. I don't know, when you kind of get it. Like after I did psilocybin, everything was so clear to me and I was like, oh, these sheeple and these people that are so hypocritical. And I was just throwing these judgment arrows at everybody. And I was like, wow. And it's because I judge myself so harshly, I think. That's still a very bad habit of mine. So that's one of my things. And also I'm self-sabotage, and I don't, what I say and what I do, what I think, say, and do are not always in alignment. And I talk too much and I don't listen enough.
Yeah, one of the big things is that I deal with is as well is seeing others, they're thriving, you know, and I'm not. And I'm like, get so angry about that. So these are things, you know, you have to realize that that's not the criteria that is coming from Yeshua. He's not saying I'm only taking the people who are thriving and are doing great, right? Everyone is welcome. And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, that was the issue I had. I had to work very hard on it, being upset that other people were thriving or copying me. So I was just saying to someone today how wonderful it is that you're engaging with people who aren't the famous. I don't know. I don't know if you have famous people on. I don't follow all your podcasts, but certainly the ones I've listened to, I've really learned, grown, been inspired. So whoever those people are, it's really amazing. So thank you.
Well, even the famous are welcome on this podcast. I have some of them as well.
Okay, I'll come back next year. Okay.
Okay, go ahead, Henry. You wanted to say something?
Um, I lost it. I gotta pick it up again. It was something about. Oh yeah, the way that I work with a lot of things with I've read A Course in Miracles a lot, so I've got the language and all that stuff really pretty accurate, I think. And it doesn't talk about grudge; it talks about grievance, and like that would be the word that you would find in the book. And so I use that a lot in my mind. And like there's a value in getting the words lined up that way because it's like the mind that I'm looking at with how mind works anyways, and I suppose it kind of works the same for everybody in a general way, is that the mind comes up with ideas and then it can get pissed off or it can, you know, do what it does, but there's always stuff that goes before it. There's ideas, and that's the way I've like Antoinette was talking about working on yourself. Well, it's kind of working on yourself, but it's more of, for me, it's like an undoing. It's like I was holding on to a specific idea about, no, I'm not going to talk personally about people on the podcast here, but then I have like a person, then I've pasted an idea on them, like I've projected an idea. But if I undo that idea, I say, well, that's not really true, is it? I mean, if I look at it, I think, no, it's not. That's not true. The actual condition is this. And it's like the idea of working with Holy Spirit is like that's what I use because he's the one, or it. It's not really masculine. Um, it gives me the better ideas. And it's like when I listen, I say, wow, that's a good idea. I'll use that. Okay, like Antoinette was saying, sometimes I don't use it and I want to do my thing, right? And but that's why I keep coming back is the value of A Course in Miracles for me is that it does have a set of ideas, a pattern of ideas, a methodology, and I I wouldn't. Yes, like Antoinette is saying, I if I think I've got it all figured, that's when it's getting really tricky because that's when I'm going to get kicked again because I get kicked with my own idea that I've got it figured. No, it doesn't work that way. There's stuff that comes up, like she says, it comes up and comes up. So, but the methodology of A Course in Miracles is it's amazing. It's really amazing because it's so accurate and it was brought to a really keen bunch of psychologists, and not for nothing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Henry, for sharing that. Now it's time to wrap things up. So, Antoinette, is there anything I didn't ask you that you'd like to share before we wrap up things completely?
I think that's it, Wanaka. And I'm I'm looking forward to you speaking on my podcast. So if there's anything we still need to discuss, we can do then. So thank you very much for giving me the space. I appreciate it. Bless you.
Bless you too. Thank you everyone for joining us, for listening, for watching. And please subscribe to the podcast on whatever way, or support it by reviewing it or sharing it with other people. If you feel that it's helpful to you, I am pretty sure that it's going to be helpful to other people as well. So please do that. And if you want to be a guest on the podcast, just connect with me and we will find a way. As long as the message is a message of love and connection and joining in walking each other home, I'm very open-minded. So even if you use a totally different language than you heard today, you're welcome. So thank you once again, and blessings to everyone all over the place, wherever you are, because I have guests from all over the world and listeners from all over the world. So thank you so much, and till next time.